Thank you so much. Friends, I'm going to share my screen now so we can start the PowerPoint. Before I do, I got several emails about people not able to see the PDF handouts on my on the YouTube channel. You have to press the beside comment the word sort and say put the newest on top, and then they'll all be there. They're also, of course, on the website, and so some of what we'll go over tonight will be the things you've already seen. Okay, so let us begin. Hold on. All right. Well, tonight's title is The Fulfillment of Messianic Prophecies, Christ and the Baha'i Paradigm. And again, the paradigm we're talking about here is the usual pattern with which the manifestations appear, what precludes them in the way of forewarnings, either by individuals or certain signs, and then how they fulfill prophecies. Sometimes often mysteriously because the prophecies have been interpreted literally, such as Christ being a king on the throne of David when he is a spiritual king, not a literal king. And the word which issues forth from the manifestations and becomes the scripture for the new revelation. We've touched on all those before, and we'll look at them again. This class and the ones that follow are, for me, very exciting because I was raised as a Christian and discovering, as I've said before, the meaning of and understanding of what Christ is saying from the Baha'i perspective opened up a whole new insight into Christianity for me. One word as we go forward about the various versions of the Bible. Some people make a big deal about this, but as long as they're accurate translations, use whatever you're comfortable with. The Guardian Shoghi Effendi loved the King James Version and actually emulates the Elizabethan style in his own translation of the writings of Baha'u'llah. The Revised Standard Version is the one I grew up with, which was a little easier to read. I like the NIV Study Bible because it's got an abundance of notes, maps, and information that you would find more and it's more of an encyclopedia kind of thing. But use whatever version. There's some versions that actually interpret rather than translate. That you don't want. Again, I remind you that a reading that we've read before that has to do with who recognizes the Christ, why the Christ is concealed, as are all the manifestation. And this quote is from the Most Holy Book by Baha'u'llah, where he says that the understanding of his words, and his words means the words of any manifestation, and the comprehension of the utterances of the birds of heaven are in no wise dependent upon human learning. They depend solely upon purity of heart, chastity of soul, and freedom of spirit. This doesn't mean human learning is being disparaged. It simply means the receptivity of the new believers will based upon their purity of motive and what they're looking for. And so the first followers of Christ, of course, are very simple and not learned individuals like the Pharisees or scribes or Sadducees. They are simple fishermen and workmen. Well is it with the sincere in heart for their share of the light of a mighty day. Now here, I'm going to show you a list. We're not going to read through all these, but this is one of the handouts I gave you, and it shows you in no particular order some of the many topics that are relevant to a Baha'i look at our discussion of Christianity. And they're just very exciting because unlike the Old Testament, where things are passed down by word of mouth, and where we have so much history crammed into such a short space. The history we're talking about here is only 3 years long insofar as the dispensation of, not the dispensation, but the revelation of Christ. Uh, so we have the literalism of the scribes and Pharisees, why he employs parables. We've already dealt with that because in effect, they're so literal that they have to think hard before they understand what he says. So when he says, I am the bread of life, he who eats of me will never die. And they say to themselves, what is this man talking about? How are we supposed to eat of his flesh? You wouldn't think anyone could take that literally, but they do. The 12 of 12s, we'll get to that. The concealment of Christ, why is that valuable? We'll deal with that tonight. What is the source of anti-feminism in Christianity? At the time of Christ, it's no big deal, but by the time Christianity becomes several hundred years old, particularly during the Middle Ages, there's a vast anti-feminism which continues to this day. And of course, there's a great irony in that you have the central figure, particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, is the Virgin Mary, who is the intercessor between the believer and Christ himself. These other things I won't read off, we'll get to them. The fulfillment of the prophecies we'll get to tonight. The second coming we'll get to either next time or the time after. Same thing with number 10. The role of the John the Baptist we'll get to tonight. This, I don't know whether we'll get to tonight or not, but this is terribly important, and that is Christ and the law. Most Christians do not study much or understand much that Christ brought a new law. And these are 16 of the particular laws that he revealed. This is in chapters 5 through 7 in Matthew. It's important because in the letters of Paul says it's not important to obey the law, just have faith. Christ doesn't say that. Christ says, he who hears my words and does not do them will be like the man who built his house upon the sand. And we'll get to that. Christology, which has to do with what is the station of Christ. Is he God incarnate? Is he just a normal human being, or is he something in between? Of course, this gets to the concept of what a manifestation is and what capacities and powers they have. And so, this is enough to go through these. You can see I've got 23 listed, and there are many more, but we'll get to most of these in one way or another. So let's deal first with the concealment of Christ. And we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves insofar as what the signs are, but we're really not. And that is, if Christ was coming, why wasn't there some forewarning about it? Well, of course, there is in John the Baptist, and there is in all of the prophecies of the Old Testament, though they were little understood. And so we've dealt with this question before. Why does God choose to conceal the manifestations? And why do they conceal themselves until the point comes where they get the sign from God that it's time to begin their revelation? And we discussed some of the reasons as being that, first of all, you want someone who knows what they're looking for. If you're looking for a king on the throne of David, not hard to spot, and anybody's going to find it, but you want to know that you're looking for a spiritual luminary, not someone with a lot of money or wealth or who is self-aggrandizing. Otherwise, who would show up but the people, if you said on a certain time and day and in this place and looking this way, great masses of people would show up, but when things got tough or the manifestation told them to do things against their traditional beliefs, they would go away. So you want the people to show up who are going to recognize the power and status and authority of this individual and who will remain faithful when they begin to be persecuted. Of course, every apostle was martyred because of their beliefs. in sometimes hideous ways. Look at what Herod did, for example, once he knew that, oh, this is imminent, because the Magi came, who were priests from the Zoroastrian faith who had come from the east, from Persia, looking, following the signs that they knew about, which were celestial signs in the sky, the Star of Bethlehem. And so as soon as he found out, he started killing off the young children who might be the possible king of David to take his place. Most of the manifestations will demonstrate the continuity and fulfillment of the prophecies that have forewarned of their coming by their manner, that a person who is attuned to and receptive to a spiritual leader will recognize immediately someone who is dignified but not haughty, who is approachable, who is loving. And so it's not hard to recognize them, again, if you are receptive and know what you're looking for. So who was the Messiah according to Jewish prophecy and particularly Jewish eschatology? Now, eschatology, as we mentioned before, is, I'm going to make a list for you of all the ologies we're studying. We're going to deal with a bunch of them, and I thought you might enjoy that. I've already made the list, but I'll share it with you another time. Eschatology is the study of the end of time, or the end times, the last days, which are talked about, of course, in every religion, but in every religion they're misunderstood as being literal, the end of the earth. And of course, that's not what it means at all. It means the end of a cycle, the end of the Adamic cycle, which ends with Muhammad, according to Baha'i belief. So in Jewish eschatology, the Messiah is two things, and this is true with all religions too. They talk about the next manifestation, and then they talk about the manifestation who will come when this cycle is over. The Messiah is a future Jewish king from the Davidic line, who is expected to be anointed with holy anointing oil and rule over the Jewish people during the Messianic age and the world to come. The Messiah is often referred to as King Messiah. Jewish messianism gave birth to Christianity, which started as a Second Temple period Messianic Jewish sect. Now, this quote here is not from the Baha'i writings. This is from an encyclopedia, and of course, written by someone who is not a believer, because, and this interested me too, because an individual who wrote a blurb, who was a very world-renowned scholar in Judaism, wrote a blurb for a book I called that I wrote called The Ark of Ascent. And I was talking to him at lunch one time when he agreed to do this, and so I said, so you obviously don't believe Christ is the Messiah, but if you don't, then you must believe that he broke the Jewish law and rebelled against Judaism. He said, that's exactly right. So it was strange to me to talk to this you would think a scholar would be objective and so on. He wasn't at all. He's a very faithful Jew. And from his historical point of view, Christ was rebellious against traditional Judaism and ruined it. Belief in the future advent of the Messiah is one of the fundamental requisites of the Jewish faith, concerning which Maimonides, now Maimonides is one of the more famous scholars and philosophers during the Middle Ages. He was Jewish, lived in Cordoba in Spain, which had become a center of learning throughout the Middle East and throughout Europe, not the Middle East, throughout Europe, as a result of the invasion of the Moors, who brought with them great learning from Islam. So he derives his learning really ultimately not only from his Jewish background, but from his the Islamic fervor for learning that occurred in Cordoba and other parts of Spain. Anyone who does not believe in him, in the Messiah, or who does not wait for his arrival, has not merely denied the other prophets, but has also denied the Torah and Moses, our rabbi. Uh, Here again, some more about the expectation of the end times. The roots of Jewish eschatology are to be found in the pre-exile prophets, and this is the exile that comes after the height of Jewish civilization, which I said last time are King David and Saul, David, and Solomon. And then you have later the King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and the Babylonian captivity and the exile of the Jews from Judea, I believe it was, including Isaiah and Jeremiah and the exile prophets, of Ezekiel and Deuteronomy, Isaiah. And you'll notice a lot of the quotes by Abdul Baha in Some Answered Questions that are interpreting Jewish prophecies about Christ come from Ezekiel and Daniel and Isaiah, as does a lot of the words of Christ where he repeats those. The main tenets of Jewish eschatology are the following, in no particular order: elaborate in books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. The end of the world. God redeems the Jewish people from the captivity that began during the Babylonian exile and a new exodus. And of course, the Jews returning to Israel after World War II felt that this was a sign of the end of the world, as did the Christian interpreters of the New Testament. So this was a sign of the second coming of Christ, because Christ speaks of two returns. As I say, so does the Old Testament. The return, which will be the next manifestation, which in terms of Judaism was Christ, and the return of the Messiah at the end of time, which would be, from a Baha'i point of view, the advent of the Bab during the resurrection and the advent of Baha'u'llah in the latter resurrection. God returns the Jewish people to the land of Israel. God restores the house of David and the temple of Jerusalem. And the temple in Jerusalem, of course, the temple wall is the holiest place for most Jews. It's merely the foundation wall of the second temple, but it's a place where Jews go to pray and to put prayers in the little crevices in the wall. It's a beautiful place, but right up above it is I was going to say the Loy Maksud, the Aqsa Mosque, which is one of the holiest mosques in Islam, because presumably it's the spot from which Muhammad ascended to heaven on his night visit. We'll get to that when we get to Islam. But that's why there's so much turmoil, one of them in shifting the head of state from Jerusalem, or it wasn't the head of state, it was the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, because that's a hot spot where you have the most holy place for the Jews right next to one of the most holy places for the Muslims. God creates a region from the house of David, the Jewish Messiah, to lead the Jewish people and the world and usher in an age of justice and peace, one leading to the first Messiah and the second leading to, we believe, to the coming of Baha'u'llah. All nations recognize the God of Israel as the only true God, and this concept of monotheism, and that really there is only one God, and that all the religions are really one religion revealed in successive and progressive stages. That's a main tenet of the Baha'i faith, and so we believe that this is an important event. God resurrects the dead. Now, this is taken literally in most fundamentalist or Protestant Christian denominations. It is taken literally by those who read the Quran and the Hadith from Islam, that the dead will literally be resurrected as the world comes to an end, and they will be allocated to whatever appropriate spiritual destiny is theirs. The Baha'i teachings say, no, the resurrection of the dead, which occurs with every manifestation, is those who are spiritually dead, and they become alive. They become resurrected from their sleep, from their lack of religious understanding. God creates a new heaven and a new earth. We've come across these passages before. We'll come to them again. But Abdu'l-Baha says the new heaven and the new earth, which are talked about in the book of Revelations, is referring to the new law, the new institution created by the manifestation and his new laws. Two messiahs then, as I said, there in the Old Testament and the New Testament. There is Christ, who is the fulfillment of the messianic expectations of the Jewish people. And then there is Baha'u'llah, who's the fulfillment of the other passages in the Old Testament, but also the second coming. Christ refers to two returns, one where he will remind you of all he has said before, and another that will come at the time of the end, where he says, no man knoweth what time that will be, not even the Son, but only the Father. So Christ admits that he doesn't know when the coming of this age of peace will be. What Baha'u'llah talks about is the golden age of this dispensation. He says it will come during this dispensation, but we don't know when. Allusion to the advent of Christ in the Old Testament. First, the throne of David, or the Davidic line, which we've just mentioned, and I shared with you, I believe, on one of the handouts. If not, I will. Here is notice this is a elliptical version of the genealogy of Christ as derived from the house of David, from the lineage of David, because you'll see right here many generations and here many generations. So it's not a complete genealogy, but there are many in some of the Bibles that you study that show the entire genealogy whereby Jesus or Christ descends from David. Some specific Old Testament prophecies about Christ. They're so plenteous, but those of you who looked on the handouts that I sent, whether on my website or on the YouTube channel, I sent you the libretto of Handel's Messiah. And I did it because the man Charles Jennings, who wrote the libretto for Handel's Messiah, this most beautiful of choral works ever created, he was the one who did the research for us in one sense. And that is 39 of the passages that he quotes that are in this libretto are prophecies from the Old Testament. And then he follows them, sometimes in the same passage, with the fulfillment of those prophecies in 23 passages from the New Testament. So you can see that more of the passages are quotes from the Old Testament than the New Testament. So those are 39 prophecies. Well, rather than go through all of them, since they are all footnoted and you can do it yourself, I just wanted to show you a couple that we're more familiar with and that are more obvious. Lucia wanted me to play a part of it because it's so gorgeous, and I wish I had time to. I also would have to refamiliarize myself on how to incorporate that into a YouTube, but I'll get more sophisticated as I recall once again how to do these things in a more showy kind of way. But it is an incredible, I often frankly listen to the Messiah just when I feel like being inspired. It's just an amazing work. And of course, we know as Baha'is, or we believe as Baha'is, it's referring as much to this day as it was to the day of Christ. So here I've put in yellow the passages that are from the New Testament, and in green, the response or fulfillment of that prophecy that's in the New Testament. And so I've numbered the part that it comes. There are several parts to the Messiah, but these are the particular passages in consecutive order. So the voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for God. This is an allusion to John the Baptist, who quotes from the words of Isaiah. And he says, I am the voice of the one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord. And of course, he's preparing the way for the coming of Christ, whom he recognizes and baptizes. And as we'll see later, even according to one of the testaments, he himself sees the Holy Spirit descend on Christ like unto a dove, whereas the others, only Christ is aware of this. So you have these differences in the four Gospels. You have what are called the four synoptic Gospels, meaning they're pretty much synonymous, though there's some variations. And you have the book of John, which is quite different. And that is quite different in that it adds a great deal of the theology that establishes the basis for most Christology, that is the nature of Christ. Second, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. And that is from Isaiah. And then you have the quote from both Baha'u'llah and Muhammad, confirming that the virgin birth actually was a virgin birth, that this was one of the miraculous signs of Christ. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. Then the recitativa, the alto, then shall the eyes of the blind be open and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart. A hart is a deer, of course, leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing. Isn't that beautiful? And of course, this is referring to those who believe this is prophecy, to mark where the blind are healed, to mark where the deaf mute is healed. Then we shall, I'm not going to read too much more of this because you have it available. If you don't, you can, of course, as usual, download the PowerPoint itself. It will be, I save it as a PDF file for you, so you don't have to have PowerPoint in order to see it. Here's another. This is from Isaiah. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd, and so on. And then Christ himself says in John, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, I know the Father, and I lay down my life for my sheep. So on. This is very much like the 23rd Psalm, which was on your quiz. We hadn't gone over that quiz yet, but we're doing it little by little. And the answer to the question of who is speaking in the 23rd Psalm, it's a sheep. And so you go back now and read it, and you realize it's alluding to this prophecy, even as the previous Psalm, the 22nd, is a description of the crucifixion of Christ, very explicitly so. And that's in a part of that Psalm is in the Messiah. He was despised and rejected of men, of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He gave his back to the smiters and his cheeks to them that plucked off his hair. He hid not his face from shame and spitting. He was despised. And then you have the same thing actually happens in Matthew. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head and a reed in his right hand, and they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. And of course, a reed was like a scepter. only it's a hollow reed, which is symbolic in a lot of ways. And they spit upon him and took the reed and smote him on the head. Now, we come to, so at any rate, there's a lot more we could do with Handel's Messiah. I just showed you some of the prophecies because it's a very good collection of prophecies rather than have to find them out for yourself, and there are a lot of books on it as well. The plight of Mary is something very interesting to Baha'is for this reason. Mary in Christianity is looked upon as this savior, matriarchal figure, the intermediary between man and Christ. And really, Mary is almost more sacrosanct and more respected than the figure of Christ himself. This is in the Roman Church, the Catholic Church. Now, this is an interesting insight, and it's a quote from the, as you can see in the next page, it's a quote from Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Iqan, the Book of Certitude, but he's quoting from the Quran in part. And what he's showing is, you'd think, oh, what a glorious thing that Mary felt. She was pregnant by God. She wasn't happy. According to the Quran and according to Baha'u'llah, she was in dire straits. She wasn't married, she was pregnant, and everyone knew she was pregnant. And so this is a statement of what she went through. Likewise, reflect upon the state and condition of Mary. So deep was the perplexity of that most beauteous countenance, so grievous her case, that she bitterly regretted she had ever been born. To this beareth witness the text of the sacred verse wherein it is mentioned that after Mary had given birth to Jesus, she bemoaned her plight and cried out, "Oh, would that I had died ere this, and been a thing forgotten quite, I swear by God." Such lamenting consumeth the heart and shaketh the being. Such consternation of soul, such despondency could have been caused by no other than the censure of the enemy and the cavilings of the infidel and perverse. In other words, she was persecuted by it, because of it. Reflect, what could be Mary's answer? What could she say to these people? Reflect, what answer could Mary have given to the people around her? How could she claim that a babe whose father was unknown had been conceived of the Holy Ghost? Therefore did Mary, that veiled and immortal countenance, take up her child and return into her home. No sooner had the eyes of the people fallen upon her, that they raised their voices, saying, "O sister of Aaron, thy father was not a man of wickedness, nor unchaste thy mother," meaning, how could you turn out to be such an immoral young lady when you had such good parents or such great lineage? Excuse me. This is another sign of the paradigm of the Baha'i faith about the signs of when a manifestation is coming. Aside from the birth of Christ, is the scene, the one scene we have from the childhood of Christ, and we have similar such episodes from the childhood of both the Bab and Baha'u'llah, one from the early life of Muhammad, but not as much. And they're all dealing with the same thing. These children are not like ordinary children. They are inherently knowledgeable and can converse intelligently about theological and philosophical matters with the most learned of men from the time they are a child. In fact, when the Bab went to his school, the teacher brought him home and said to his parents, to his mother, his father had died, I have nothing to teach him, he knows everything. But he went back in any case. So this is the story of Jesus in the temple when he's 12 years of age, at least according to Matthew, Luke. So I'm not going to read through this, but suffice it to say, it's as he grew up, as was the custom at the Feast of Passover, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, their son, went to Jerusalem. And after 3 days, they lost track of him. They presumed he had gone home with his kinfolk, but they couldn't find him. So they went back. Needless to say, they were scared to death. And there he was, sitting in the midst of the doctors of religion. This would be the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and so on, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. And this is his famous response. And he said to them, How is it that you sought me? Wist ye not? And wist is an Elizabethan derivation of the word witan, which is an Old English word meaning to know. And it's the familiar form of the verb, did you not know that I must be about my father's business? And of course, he's talking here about his spiritual father, not Joseph. And they understood not what the saying that which he spake unto them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. She's one of the first to believe in him. The epiphany of Christ. Let me take a nice sip of my tea and then we'll get into that. We'll go as far as we go tonight, and there's so much more. So here is the next stage in the progress of the paradigm of the Baha'i faith about the pattern that follows the life of every manifestation. And that is, there comes a point where they receive a signal from God that now is the time to reveal who you are, to become unconcealed, to forthrightly announce your station, and to begin teaching and preaching your new revelation and start your new religion. And this occurs with Christ, as you all are probably familiar, when he's baptized by John the Baptist, who himself was persecuted and beheaded because he himself was claiming to be the one foretelling the advent of the Christ. At first, some thought he was the Messiah. The people were waiting expectantly and were all wondering in their hearts if John might be the Messiah, possibly be the Messiah. Answered them all, I baptize you with water, but one who is more powerful than I will come, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. This is kind of like what the Bab says about the coming of Baha'u'llah. He says, I am like a ring on his finger. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. Winnowing fork is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his barn. But he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. And of course, this is a figurative fire, not a literal fire. With many other words, John exhorted the people and proclaimed to them the good news. And then the baptism itself. When all the people were being baptized, Jesus was baptized too. And as he was praying, heaven was opened. The Holy Spirit descended on him in bodily form like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, you are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased. Now, what's interesting is that in the book of John, John himself sees this event. So you'd think this is, as it is with Baha'u'llah, he was in a dream when he saw the veiled maiden appear to him in prison and convey to him that the time had begun. But in this version in John, it says, John gave testimony, I saw the Spirit come down from heaven as a dove and remain on him. I myself did not know him, but the one who sent me to baptize with water told me, the man on whom you see the Spirit come down and remain is the one who will baptize with the Holy Spirit. So which is correct? Well, we don't know because the Gospels have equal weight among most people. Uh, so we only know when either Muhammad or Christ straighten out the events, which they do in many cases. We're going to finish with this one idea of the temptation by Satan, which is one of my favorite events in the life of Christ, because he goes into, and again, it depends on which gospel. According to some gospels, he immediately goes and finds his disciples. Peter, the first, a fisherman, a simple fisherman who's illiterate, and so on. But according to the other gospels, he first goes into the wilderness for 40 days where he fasts and is tempted by Satan. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. First of all, there is no Satan in the Old Testament, except in the Adamic myth. But Satan, and then in the book of Job, which is, in some Bibles, is apocryphal. It's not included in every Bible, the book of Job. But the book of Job is its own thing. But you don't hear much about Satan warring with God or the devil or anything like that. You hear about worshiping idols in the Old Testament, but not Satan. So where is Satan come from? How do we know about this encounter? Well, first let me say up front, to give away the obvious, Baha'is believe there is no such thing as a being called Satan, nor either is there a source of evil. Evil is non-existent as an essence. It is simply something we call bad results from either chance or misfortune, but if it's an evil act, we mean something that derives from an immoral act by a human being. But Satan in the Baha'i writings is clearly defined as the self, is the temptation of yourself or your licentious nature, your lower self, to overcome your higher self. And so the war, if you will, is between yourself, your higher self, and your lower self. So what does it mean then if Baha'u'llah is correct and there is no such thing as a real Satan, even though he says it's a useful metaphor, then why does Christ talk about Satan? And when I say, why does Christ talk about it? Why do the Gospels talk about it? Well, my first question is, how do the Gospels know about it? Nobody was with Christ, which means he had to tell them. Second, who is Satan? He doesn't appear in the Old Testament. What is Christ being tempted to do? That is the clue to what this is all about. What is the ultimate symbolic meaning of these temptations, and why is Christ alone and reflecting when he does this? And why is this something that all the manifestations seem to go through? And that is, once they are anointed, once they have the intimations of their revelation, they go off for a while by themselves and reflect, and I presume ready themselves what's about to happen, because they all know that they're going to be tortured or persecuted. The Bab says this long before there's any indication of it, that he's going to be executed. So does Christ. So they know what's to come. So what does this represent? Clearly, they aren't really tempted, because they're perfect individuals and they're born that way and they live in the world of the spirit before they come here. But it's obviously important for us to know that what these individuals reject. So what is he tempted by the devil? The first thing, he is tempted with making a stone into bread. His response, man shall not live by bread alone, but by what proceeds out of the mouth of God. Then this individual, or this figurative image, says, he takes him up to the holy city and set it on the top of the pinnacle of a temple and says, if you're the Son of God, cast yourself down, because you obviously can't hurt yourself. Well, obviously this is something Christ could actually do, but he says in return, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Don't tempt me to do anything. It's not your place. Then the devil says, takes him up to a high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and says, I can give you all of these if you'll just worship me, meaning if you'll turn inward and worship yourself. If you become self-serving, you can have whatever you want. And of course, since the manifestation has that power, they could. Christ says, get thee behind me, get thee hence, Satan. Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only. And so the devil leaves, and the angels minister to Christ. What this represents, insofar as I'm concerned, my own interpretation is simply the obvious, and that is Christ is showing us that in order to accomplish what he does, he has no self-serving purpose, even as he says, give unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God. None of the manifestations desires or acquires earthly ascendancy or power. That'll be more complicated. Excuse me. That question will get more interesting when we get to Muhammad, because he does become involved in establishing a political state. But the same thing applies.